offerings last week, our summer series, so Caleb was covered for me then. Today we are back in the book of Esther. And so I gave you a handout. This is the rest of chapter 1. And so we looked at a little bit of Esther, chapter 1. We got through looking at the first feast, and as we talked about, that feast was a drinking fest, basically. And the king had made this feast to last many days. How many days was it?
7.
The first one was 180 days, so half a year almost. And then the second one was 7 days, and that's where we're at now. So the second feast, and that starts in verse 10. And so let's read verse 10 through see verse 15. Does someone want to read that? All right, you want me to read it? It says, on the 7th day when the heart of the king... Oh yeah, I forgot all the names from there. I understand. On the 7th day when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehumah, Biztha, Harbonah, Bigtha, Agatha, Zerda, Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served the prince of the king Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, and those closest to him being Karshina, Surtha, Shethar, I guess it is, Admatha, Tarshish, Mers, Merzina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence, and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she did not obey the commandment of the king Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs. Okay, so we're not going to read those names again, but we know they're there. And so what has happened was on the 7th day of this feast, the king, it says he was merry with wine. That means he was drunk. So remember that during this time there was no restrictions put upon how much a person would drink, even though that was the law before. And that could mean that they were told to drink so much under the old law, their law before, or they were able to drink as much as they wanted. Whatever the case may be, we know that they were drunk. And so, as we've talked about with King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, if you look at history, a lot of times it says Xerxes, how did he handle situations? Not great. It's interesting when we look at this account because we're going to see him make a terrible decision and then make a good decision, as in not rashly doing something. And so he makes a rash decision followed by a not rash decision, which is very interesting. But in this state of drunkenness, he then asks that his 7 eunuchs here, I'm not going to mention the names anymore, to bring the queen before the king wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials. And so, while we're looking at this, we have this idea here of what is he really requesting. Now, the text tells us that he wanted her to wear her royal crown to come before the king to show her beauty. Now, there's many ideas on what that really meant, because you could think in the text, why would she refuse this? Would it have been a request that she was to wear something that was very provocative and that was showing off in the sense of being very immodest? Could it be that the request that he made was something that was not something you would request of a queen to do? We don't know. We think about it. What was he doing those last 7 days? What was he showing off? All his stuff. Yeah. He was very prideful, showing off all his wealth and all his things and all his stuff. And so the last day, he's like, all right, the last thing I have to show off is my queen. And he wanted to show her off. And so it had to be something, in my mind, it had to be something unusual, not customary, because she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to parade herself in front of all these people to satisfy what the king asked. Like I said, there's many speculations on what was requesting of her. Could have been that she was to come in her royal robes, that was she was to be unveiled, maybe just wearing her crown, whatever the case may be, we don't know. But to me, it had to be something that she did not want to do because it was something out of the ordinary. Now, the Encyclopedia has an interesting take on this that I thought was just to throw in as an idea, because we're speculating here. But Plutarch was a writer that wrote a lot of the events of this time, tells us in agreement with Herod 518 that the kings of Persia had their legitimate wives to sit at table with him at their banquets, but that when they choose to riot and drink, they would send their wives away and call them the concubines and the singing girls. You can imagine what that is. Hence, when the heart of Ahasuerus was very merry with wine, he sent for Vashti, looking upon her as only as one of his concubines, or one of those people. She, on the other hand, considering herself as one of the legitimate, as in being the queen, she refused. And so their take on it was that this was not something they would request of a queen to do. And so she wasn't going to do it. She was not going to lower herself to the standard of what would happen at these kind of parties. And that's an interesting thought. Now, you could go all the way back and just say, this was a request of her just showing up, just to show off her beauty, and she didn't want to do that. And whatever the case may be, it was something that she did not want to do. And it was something, of course, this request was made while he was intoxicated, so was it probably the best decision he made? No. Do people make the best decisions when they're intoxicated? No. Never. And so the request here had to have been something that she did not, that would have been unusual. And so verse 12 says, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. She refused to listen to this request. Now, he's the king. Would this have been dangerous for her? She could have lost her life. Now, I'm sure most of us have, if not all of us have read the book of Esther. Why was Esther worried later about going to the king?
Because you're not supposed to go unless you're summoned.
Unless you're summoned. She could have died. She was the queen. She had a lot of authority, a lot of power. Yet, because the king was the ultimate authority in the land, she could still lose her life, even though she was the queen. So here, with Vashti saying, I'm not going to do this, she, in a sense, could have died. And it's interesting is we do not see that happen to her at all. And so it was dangerous for her. She knew the consequences of being the king. Now, think about this, because they're going to take this and they're going to turn it into a husband and wife situation. He is the king and she is the queen. She is a wife and he is a husband, right? And so they're going to turn it into that. Now, I don't think that, I'm sure what we're going to see here as we go along the rest of this chapter is how they treated women during that time was not great. And I think we see that in this text here. They're trying to apply it to a husband and wife situation, and I don't think that this is a good thing of what was requested here for sure. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this. But she willingly was ready to die if needed not to go before him. She knew she could die. This is why I believe this just did not want to do because she knew it was wrong. And so, you can say a lot about her and her willingness to stand up for what was right. What was she willing to sacrifice? Her life, everything. Not only that, as we're going to see, she's going to lose everything. She's not going to lose her life, but she's going to lose everything. But she was willing to sacrifice that for doing what was right. And so how often do we, if we're put in a situation like that, are willing to sacrifice for what is right? Fortunately, in our country, we're not at a place where that happens. I think there's places in the world that happens to, where people may not lose their life, but they lose their families, they lose their homes. I know of a friend of mine, Zach, I went to school with. He works in India, and there are many, many widows' homes there that they help take care of, because if a wife chooses to convert to Christianity and not be in the Hinduism and stuff, or Islam that is in that country, their husbands will kick them out. And then they're thrown on the streets and left to die. So the church does a lot to help those widows, or not widows, but those that have been kicked out of their homes. And so there's people in the world that are willing to lose their everything they have to do what was right. And so I think she can be admired for that. Like I said, we don't know what the request was, but obviously in my mind it's something that was not right, and she was willing to stand up for it. And so the king's very upset. And so look at the king's response in verse 13. He said, to the wise men who understood the times. Now what does that mean? Understood the times. There's different ideas. It could be that these wise men were magi or astrologers. So let me read Daniel chapter 2 and verse 2.
Then the king commanded to all magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king.
All right, so during Daniel's time, which is Nebuchadnezzar, which is really the Babylonian Empire, we're in the Medo-Persian Empire, but Daniel worked in both. When the king, or Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, Daniel had a dream that he didn't understand who he called for. These astrologers. Well, he did call for Daniel in time, yes. But at the beginning, he goes to these astrologers and magi in a sense. And what they did was they tried to make decisions based upon the stars and where they're sitting at that time, the constellations, and things like that. And if you look throughout the history of Israel, God told Israel to get those people out of their country, out of their lands, because of it's all false. They're not doing anything. They're just tricking them. And so it's believed that that's who he went to here. It could have also been lawyers. Now, who was a lawyer during this time? What do lawyers do? Well, at that time, lawyers were people that interpreted the law, that knew the law, which is very kind of similar to today. But they would know the laws, and they would also know the consequences of the laws. And so Ahasuerus here, instead of, which is very interesting for him, instead of him saying, as he was, if you look at the end of the verse before, verse 12, it says the king was furious and his anger burned within him. That is a very intense, two different words there describing his anger. He was extremely angry. We have seen him in his extremely angry state in other places. At one point he had the Hellespont slashed with whips, and all the people that built the bridge murdered because he was angry. There's another time where he was up in Asia marching through. One of the kings at that time that was in that area bowed down to him and said, "Let my son serve with you." He cut his son in half and made the army march between them because he was angry. So he's shown this anger in this past, but in this time, he goes, instead of harsh or rashly doing something, he says, I'm going to go to my advisors, which I think is very interesting. Why he did that, I don't know. But it's interesting.
Sobered up.
Maybe he sobered up. Could be, I don't know. And so here he goes to his wise men, and he talks to them. So it could have been lawyers, it could have been whatever, the magi, the people at that time. They understood the law. He wanted to know what they could do according to law for this certain thing. And so he, of course, their answer, what did they say to him? Verse 13, or verse 15. It says, what shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law, because she did not obey the command that King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And so Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. What is he saying there?
That all the women are going to rebel against her husband.
Yes, that's what he's saying. He's saying, what she has done is going to get spread out throughout the kingdom. And so all the wives are going to say, you know what, we don't have to listen to our husbands. We're going to do what the queen did. And so he's saying what she did was not only against the king, but it was against the rest of the land. And so his answer to what they need to do was they need to stop this. And so what she has done is an influence. And so what does he say in the next verse? Verse 17, for the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. Now, something interesting to note. The word that's used here, husbands, it does have that idea. In some places it is used in reference to husband, but it also is used in the sense of an owner, a ruler, a possessor. And it also has been used to refer to Baal, which is the god of the Canaanites. And I think it determines its context. And I think in this context, what they're trying to do, they're trying to make that husband and wife situation wrong. I don't think it's right. They're trying to say that no matter what he requested of her as a husband and a wife, she was supposed to do it. Now, is that what we see in the New Testament? Is that what we see of God's design of marriage? No, not at all. So I'm going to read Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25.
I think, though, if you take the husband and the other text you had, too, that would be like all the servants, it would just be a huge riot.
Yeah.
Because none of them would have to listen to that.
Exactly. Ephesians 5, verse 25.
Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her.
All right, so here Jesus, or Paul, being inspired, gives the gives us what it means to be a husband and wife, and the husband is supposed to love his wife as Christ loved the church. That means he is not going to ask things that are wrong of her. That means he is not going to do things that would cause to be bad for her. Is that what the king did here? Yes. And so in my mind, when I look at this text, the writer of Esther, we don't know who the writer was. Remember we talked about it could have been different people. They don't give us any other commentary on what happened here. They're just giving us the facts. And I think what we're seeing is we're getting a glimpse into what the world was like at that time and how they treated women, which I don't think was good at all. And that's what we see here and what's going on. And I think that's why the word that they used here in this context means that. And so verse 18 says, the very day the noble ladies of Persia and Mede media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus, there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall not come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And so, in this, the request that we see here, they wanted to make these things law so they could never be altered. And not only that, what are they trying to make law here? Not just this decree that wives are to be, in what was talked about here, and submissive to their, and what they're using as a master. What are they also saying here to the people of this land? And to Vashti?
They're also trying to create a appearance of authority, but don't you think, though, that she embarrassed him, so he was setting out to humiliate her?
Yep, I agree. I think exactly what's going on. Because in the decree, we see here, what does it say about her? What's going to happen to her? She's losing everything. She's still going to be married to King Ahasuerus. She was then going to be really a concubine. She was not going to be a wife. She was not going to be a queen. She was going to lose her position, her power, her authority, and everything, and to her influence. Because really, what are they worried about? Her influence.
Everybody else.
Huh?
All the other ones doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so we see that this outcome here is they're trying to stop the influence that she had in standing up to the king. And as Kathy said, he was embarrassed. He's the king. And here he can't, he's the king of the land. He can command people to do whatever he says to do. And his wife says no to him. He's embarrassed. And he's upset. And these men are helping him do what he wants done. And so she was never going to come before the king again. Not only that, she was never going to come before him. She'd be treated like a concubine. To make this law to reverse any influential actions that would come from other homes. And so, as they stated in that, this law, this proclamation can never change. And that's the thing about Medo-Persia that we get from them, is that when they make a law, they don't change it. And we see that with God's law, right? God has set in act his commands in the New Testament, and they're not going to change. They don't get altered. And that's what we see happening here, is that their laws do not get altered. And so then verse 21, it says, "And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of his servant. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people." There's that word again. It didn't say just be husbands or be the leader of the home. What did it say? Be a master. And so that's where I think with this, we're getting an idea of the life and how women were treated at that time. Because in God's eyes and in marriage, it's not a master-slave situation. That's not what God designed. It's to be a husband is to be the leader of the home, and he's supposed to love his wife and to respect her and take care of her, and not ask stupid requests or things like this that are not right from
Of course,
his
it wasn't that
wife.
way until this happened. I mean, the decree didn't go out until this happened.
Yeah,
So it was just a matter of soothing his injured pride,
yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. It was. Because now he's going to find another queen, which is going to be Esther, as we're going to find out. And then that's going to play into what God needs done. But, yeah, I think he's just trying to cover up his pride, his being hurt. So, all right, any questions on the rest of this chapter? Anything on this an interesting chapter. We're getting a picture into what it was like during that time. And you know, this is not a godly nation. This is an ungodly nation. They are not serving God. And, you know, Esther's going to come into that, and we're going to see that the people around the king wanted God's people dead. And Esther's going to have a chance to, an opportunity to save them. And so, anything else on this chapter? All right, well, that's all I have for tonight, so we'll stop here a few minutes early, but that'll be all right. Yeah. Starting at chapter 2 next